Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Atlantic Council event, Global Foresight 2036, What Will the Next Decade Bring? My name is Matthew Kranig, and I'm Atlantic Council Vice President and Senior Director of the Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. The United States and its allies face an uncertain and potentially dangerous future. It risks losing its technological and economic edge to China, confidence in international institutions and democracy is declining, and major power war is increasingly likely. On the other hand, there's good news on the horizon. Russian power will decline further following its war in Ukraine, and the United States will continue to maintain a robust set of alliances and partnerships, even if NATO is reconfigured. At least these were some of the key findings of our annual Global Foresight survey, which launches today as part of the Scowcroft Center's 5th annual flagship Foresight report, Global Foresight. Global Foresight has been the Atlantic Council's most read report every year since its creation several years ago. Global Foresight is a reflection of where the world is now and an assessment of where it might be headed in the future. The report is innovative as well as thematically and geographically broad. It gathers together some of the best thinking from across the Council's programs and centers in one document. As in previous years, Global Foresight 2036 consists of 3 main elements. First, we have a global survey of nearly 450 geostrategists from over 70 countries about what the world might look like in 2036. Second, the report uncovers 6 new snow leopards, which are under-the-radar phenomena spotted by the Council's up-and-coming analysts. Third and finally, we have a video series about the future of artificial intelligence. So today we're going to explore these topics with the Council's leading thinkers. I also encourage you all to read the full report in more detail following the event at the Global Foresight 2036 landing page on our website. Convenings on topics like this are central to the Scowcroft Center's mission of developing sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most important security challenges facing the United States and its allies. We also honor the legacy of service of General Brent Scowcroft, including his ethos of nonpartisan commitment to the cause of security, support for U.S. leadership and cooperation with allies and partners, and mentorship of the next generation of leaders. Our programs focus on strategy and foresight, transatlantic and Indo-Pacific alliances, and deterrence and defense. So thank you all very much for joining us here today. We're really looking forward to the event. This event is obviously public and on the record. And now I'm honored to introduce Peter Angelke. He's our senior fellow in the Geostrategy Initiative and our foresight lead. He's going to begin by reviewing the survey results and their implications. So Peter, the floor is yours.
All right, good morning, and welcome to the Atlantic Council. My name, as Matt said, is Peter Angelke. I'm a senior fellow here at the organization, and my primary responsibility, not the only one, but my primary responsibility at the Atlantic Council is to run our foresight practice. So what I'd like to do today, as Matt said, is talk a little bit about what it is we're launching this morning, as well as some, and I emphasize only some, a very few of the major findings. So let's go back 5 years and talk to Peter 5 years ago. And my idea then, as well as the people that we were working with at the time here at the Council, had a vision. And that vision was, as is shown on the screen. What we wanted to do is to produce an annual capstone series featuring the best thinking that we could collect from the Atlantic Council, from our staff, from fellows, from our board, from our executives, and from the stakeholders who engage with us. We wanted to utilize foresight framing and tools to assess how the future might unfold, and I should emphasize might. And we wanted to bring the entire Atlantic Council, as I just referenced, into that process, both on the production side, as well as on the interpretation of results side. And then to do all of that in a really cool way, a modular and dynamic way, which we've done. In other words, this document, as Matt indicated, is thematically broad, geographically broad. It's got a bit of everything in it. It's very, very rich, and I encourage all of you here and online to take a look and read it. But we also knew that we had to produce it in a way in which it was engaging and dynamic for you to consume, and we've done that every year. And then finally, we also wanted to retune what we're doing annually based on our market response. In other words, what all of you think and how you respond to what it is that we're producing. And I'm happy to say that we've done exactly that over the past 5 years. As Matt has indicated, we have the #1 report. I'm very proud of that fact. Here at the Atlantic Council, in terms of long-form documents, every year since Global Foresight 2022 was launched. The PDF, the image on the right-hand side of the screen, Global Foresight 2036, is a mock-up. That is not the final design because it doesn't exist yet, but it's pretty close to what it will look like when the PDF is actually done. But the digital landing page, of course, has all sorts of cool images and video content on it as well. So let's get into a little bit into the content, and my slide seems to have disappeared. I think I need to go back one, actually.
It's behind you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's the problem.
Just go to the next slide, please.
There we go. Okay, sorry. So as Matt indicated, there are three components to Global Foresight 2036, and those are shown on this slide, three main components. This is what the modular part I was talking about earlier. So Welcome to 2036 is our team's interpretation of the survey that we launch every fall, a survey of experts out in the world, of what they think about how the world might unfold out to the year 2036. The second is, again, as Matt indicated, a series of 6 snow leopards. These are under-the-radar phenomena that, although we know they exist, we don't really appreciate their significance, just like the majestic cat that lives in the Himalayas. But they could become significant phenomena down the road. And then finally, new this year is an AI in the future component, wherein we tasked our AC Tech experts, who are experts in tech and AI, put them on camera and asked them how they think the future of AI might unfold going forward. So we have some video component also in this year's edition. So let me talk really quickly about some, and I emphasize some, of the major findings in the survey. So every year, every fall, we put a survey into the field where we ask people who fall under the category of geostrategists. These are people who specialize in international affairs, geopolitics and related fields, as well as strategic foresight experts, what they think across a broad set of themes. Geopolitics, obviously, but the global economy, technology, diplomacy, demographics, Earth systems, and much more than that. This year, we received about 450 respondents from that effort across 72 countries, and we asked a set of 32 questions. What my team has done is produce the top 10 findings, which you can read this morning in the Global Foresight 2036 launch. I don't have the time to go into all of these, but you can see that our top 10 findings really do span a gamut of important issues that are top of mind to everybody in the world, or most people in the world anyway, right now, including number 1 on the list, that our respondents, again, these are what our respondents are telling us, are saying that China in the year 2036 has risen, meaning that it is no longer perceived as being just a challenger to the United States, but rather a peer to the United States. I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. But other geopolitically related findings, for example, the future of NATO, what happens with Russia and Ukraine, what about nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation, what about Europe and its power as well as its strategic autonomy, and then a number of other areas, including, for example, as I mentioned before, artificial intelligence, Earth systems, climate change and water, fresh water, and much more besides. Now, again, given time limitations, I cannot possibly go into this very, very rich set of findings that we have. I encourage all of you to take a look. But I'm going to highlight 3 questions, 4 questions actually, in 3 categories. The first is the top line question that we have, which is, do you think the future is going to be good or bad, basically? Will it be better or worse than it is today? And we're finding that almost 2/3 of our respondents say the world in 2036 is going to be worse than it is today. So some pessimism out there. Second, we also ask about power and its distribution in the global system. This chart is complex, so I don't ask you to digest all of this information. But nonetheless, what we wanted to do in this edition of the survey was ask about rising and falling. Who's going to be sort of number 1, number 2, et cetera, in the world in 10 years' time, and ask about 5 political entities, if you will: US, China, India, the EU, Russia, and Russia. And I would focus your eyes on the left-hand side of each one of the bars, on the orange and on the purple. And that's the United States in the orange and China in the purple. And you can see, without going through each one of these, that basically by 2036, with the exception of military power and to a lesser extent soft power, the respondents are telling us that China will be a peer of the United States. And in one area, economic power, our respondents are saying, believe that China will outweigh the United States. Now, this is just their positions. It's not our opinion. We're reporting this data. So we thought that finding was really interesting. And then finally, on questions of warfare and conflict, we have a number of questions in the survey that are relevant to those topics, one of which is, will there be or have been by 2036 another world war involving a multi-front conflict among great powers? Good news and bad news. Good news is no. The majority say no, 59%. The bad news is, a sizable minority, 41%, say we will have another world war involving a multi-front conflict. And that gets to another question that we asked, not exactly the same thing, but in the same ballpark. Certainly, if there's another world war, we have to fear what comes next, which would be the possible use of nuclear weapons. And one of the questions that we asked is about nuclear proliferation. And here we thought that the finding was pretty astonishing, which is that, yes, 85% of our respondents said that in the next 10 years, additional countries or territories in the world will acquire nuclear weapons. So much fear of nuclear proliferation. So I only was given 10 minutes, and I know that we've got a couple of panels that are going to be speaking about all of these topics and more in the next hour or so. But before I do, I would like to highlight something that all of you can do while you're listening to today's event, which is to take a look at this QR code, use this QR code, and that will give you access to a 3-question survey. 3 of those questions that, 3 of the 32 questions that were in our survey that we issued in the fall. I'll come back on stage at the end of today's event and talk about the findings that we get from all of you. So if you want to do that while you're listening to the panels, then please go ahead. And with that, let me end and introduce Morgan Chalfant, who is the Deputy Washington Editor for Semaphore, and the first panel. Thank you very much.
Hello. As Peter mentioned, I'm Morgan Chalfant, the Deputy Washington Editor at Semaphore. Really excited for this conversation. So I wanted to start first with the findings on U.S.-China power competition. I'll start with you, Melanie. This finding that China will best the United States in economic power, I'm wondering if you agree with that and why you think that was the conclusion of the experts in this survey.
Sure. So first, thank you for having me, and thanks, Matt and team, for doing this important work. A leading America's expert in China in a closed-door session recently made the comment to a bunch of Americans that China already is America's peer, and the Americans are the only ones who haven't figured that out yet. But the rest of the world is already there. I think we underestimate China's strengths and ambitions at our peril. I would say that across the board, we are still ahead, but we have almost zero margin for error. China, the economy is growing, particularly in the high-tech sectors. They definitely have challenges. They have unemployment challenges. There are a lot of problems with the Chinese economy. But I was recently talking to a very wise leading investment banker who said, look, think about it this way. China's GDP doesn't look great. The numbers aren't what Beijing would want them to be. But when you crack that box open, they're doing everything right with the fundamentals of innovation. They're rolling out robotics and high-end manufacturing deployment. They're racing ahead on innovation. Someone recently described Made in China 2025 is the world's best industrial plan because they're achieving those targets that they set out to achieve. The same banker told me, flip that and look at the United States. Our numbers look great. The stock market is growing, but when you crack that open and look inside, the fundamentals aren't working well. There's every day new information about unemployment. Small businesses are really struggling with the tariffs. We gutted NIH. That's where our biotech innovation comes from. Within the United States, we're kneecapping a lot of our drivers of innovation at the very moment that China's just hitting the gas. And so behind the numbers, this is entirely feasible for 2036 or earlier.
Matthew, what do you think? I mean, do you agree with that finding, and what does it say about U.S. strategy, to outcompete China? Like, is the U.S. failing at its policies?
Yeah. Well, our experts said it's true, so clearly it's true. But also, one of the things we do in the report is we ask some of our experts to comment on the findings. And so Dexter Tiff Roberts is one of our China experts, and he pointed to the challenges that China faces and was a little bit more skeptical. And I'd probably associate myself with him. And just point out, in 2010, people were saying that China is going to be the world's largest economy by 2020, measured in real GDP. That they didn't hit it. 2020, people were saying, well, by 2030. It doesn't look likely that it's going to happen by 2030, according to that measure. And more you have economists who say, you know what, maybe the real date is never. And so in terms of what the United States can do, I do think that our innovation model and free markets, a lot of evidence and theory to suggest that works better than a system that has a heavy state hand. And so I think doubling down on what's made us the innovation leader since the time of Thomas Edison will continue to work.
Just following on that, I mean, we've seen moves by the Trump administration to take a stake in Intel and sort of exercise more, U.S. control over private companies. Is that the wrong way to go then, is sort of following a China model?
Yeah, I think it's a balance. There are always national security exceptions to free markets. The United States could have made a lot of money by selling nuclear weapons to North Korea, but we've decided that's not a good idea. That does need to be something where the state is more involved. And so I think now we're in this process of rethinking what are the economic supply chains and other areas that really are national security reasons where we can't rely on free markets. So some government intervention is necessary, but it can quickly go too far.
Mm-hmm. And this is something I'd like to hear from all of you on. To what degree are you surprised that the U.S. is only viewed as the dominant military power in this survey? Jorn?
I think that's not surprising given the unique reach, global reach of the United States military, the spending levels, the technology leadership across so many areas, and the fact that the United States has exercised that global military reach more recently, certainly, than China in any significant way in complex operations, whether you supported those interventions or not. But I'm not just talking about January 3rd. Going back the last 20, 30 years. Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably a big part of the explanation why you see those figures. Mm-hmm.
And Melanie, what do you think? And how does this affect your view of, what a potential conflict over Taiwan would look like?
Well, look, I think if you look at the findings from the survey, there were quite a lot of people who are worried that we will have a Taiwan conflict in the next 10 years. If you look at how Beijing is thinking and behaving right now, it seems like things have settled down a little bit because Beijing is looking at what's happening within Taiwan. They see that the KMT gained seats in the legislature in the last election. The KMT is the party that tends to be more pro-Beijing, the DPP less so. So they seem to be feeling at this moment in time that maybe time is actually on their side, and if they wait things out, that Taiwan will evolve in a direction that brings it closer to China, and there's no need to move in the near term. We also see that Xi Jinping just keeps taking out all the generals in the Chinese military. So, on the one hand, China military experts are talking among themselves saying, well, this is going to slow things down because they're eliminating everybody who has any experience in warfare. On the other hand, they're eliminating the generals who are most likely to tell Xi Jinping no. and to most likely say, our military isn't ready to move on Taiwan, we need to wait. So I'm reassured at the current moment by what I'm watching in the discourse coming out of China, but I think we have to be aware that at least for the next probably 2 to 5 years, Beijing's focus is going to be just looking for every opportunity to erode Taiwan's national position and make the island feel isolated. We have to be very vigilant for that. But I think the risk of an actual invasion has gone down relative to, say, 12 months ago.
Interesting, and it is really interesting, and I'll pull up this slide showing that 70% of the respondents in this survey believe that within the next decade there will be an effort by China to forcibly take Taiwan. Matthew, when you look at U.S. defense strategy, what the U.S. is doing with its allies to prepare for such a possibility, do you think that the U.S. is doing enough?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. It's somewhat in our control, and can we get our deterrence strategy right? And in terms of will China attempt to take Taiwan, we know that he's asked his military to give him the ability to do it by 2027. So I guess the good news part of that is he thinks he's not ready yet, but wants to be ready next year. And so part of that depends on China's capabilities, but again, it also depends on what the United States and its allies do. And I think we're not quite there yet, but there is a lot of good activity. Admiral Paparo in Indo-Pacific Command has this hellscape concept to use unmanned systems and other things to not deny a Chinese invasion. So I think that the two major variables in Xi's mind thinking about an attack on Taiwan are one, what is the military balance of power? Can I do this or not? But the second one, I think, is Taiwan slipping away or not? Because their preferred strategy, of course, would be to win without fighting, to coerce Taiwan to unify. But if it seems like that's impossible and it's slipping away, in fact, I've had some of the best China experts I've talked to, I'd be interested in Melanie's view, say that, for example, if Taiwan declared independence, that even if she knew he would lose, he would have to go to war over that. He couldn't let Taiwan declare independence and not challenge it.
Melanie, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I think that would be such a red line for Xi Jinping that he would probably make a move. But that's why it's so interesting to watch what's happening within the PLA, right? And there was this 2027 timeline, and some of the chatter among China experts is these are probably at least the most recent takedown is probably the person who is telling him, no, we're not ready. So one has to worry about what kind of, when dictators start taking out everyone who tells them the truth, we do have to be a little bit worried about what they understand about the capabilities and the timeline.
And Melanie, when Joe Biden was president, he said publicly a couple of times that the U.S. would come to Taiwan's defense. It caused quite a stir, particularly in China. I would say I think that President Trump has been a little bit more circumspect in sort of his strategy on Taiwan. Do you think that Taiwan is worried about Trump and the U.S. defending Taiwan if there was some kind of conflict, or do you think there's still confidence there?
The survey data from Taiwan demonstrates that the people of Taiwan are worried. I think President Trump is trying to manage the situation by hopefully intentionally sending mixed messages, to try to keep China calm on this front. But he needs to, I hope that he's keeping in mind that the people of Taiwan are as important as an audience as Beijing, and what the US president says in Washington matters to the people of Taiwan. In that regard, I think President Biden's statement was very important. I 100% expect that if China were to invade Taiwan, the United States would respond. So it's not surprising to me to hear a president say that, but it's important, I think, if that is the case, that needs to be on the table and very clear and part of Xi Jinping's calculus, and be part of the understanding on the island as well.
Matthew, what do you think about this? I mean, do you think that Trump is just adhering to strategic ambiguity, or is he kind of wavering on Taiwan?
Well, I remember one of his quotes was something like, "Xi knows what I would do. He knows what I would do." And I took that as meaning that Xi knows that he would respond, and that he couldn't get away with it. And I think Trump is proud of this idea that he's a peacemaker, often points out that Putin attacked Ukraine under other presidents, but not under him. So I do think that Trump is, in his own way, trying to send a deterrent message, but not as forward-leaning as Biden. And I think he does have mixed goals with regard to China. He would also love to get a big trade deal. So I think he is trying to deter while also not trying to rub China's face in it.
That makes sense. I'm going to move now to NATO. A lot of interesting findings in the survey on NATO and US-Europe cooperation. One of the findings here is 44% that NATO won't exist in its current form in the next decade. Jorn, what do you think the alliance looks like in 2036, and how much has it changed?
I think we will see significant change. We've already seen this administration push hard on Europeans to, not just on the defense spending side, we're all familiar with the 3.5 plus 1.5 equals 5% by 2035 increase commitments at The Hague. But in terms of taking over, for example, specific commands, we've seen the US push for European countries to do that. And I think as in the overall relationship between the United States and Europe, we'll see a rebalancing. In many ways, I think a Europeanization of NATO, even if people in Washington, D.C. will be very, that will not be well received by some. And I think the consequences of that will also are not entirely clear among those pushing for a much greater European role in NATO. I don't think we're snapping back after a change of administrations, after President Trump's second term. I also think this administration has made clear where it wants European partners to step up. It has consistently talked about the conventional deterrent, signaling that the U.S. would probably fall back in terms of in many respects. I'm not saying across the board, but to much more of a role of providing that nuclear umbrella and letting the Europeans, or expecting the Europeans to step up on many of the other capabilities under a NATO framework.
Matthew, I'm curious for your thoughts on this. I mean, what do you see the alliance looking like in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I think Jorn used the term rebalance, and I agree with that. And the question we have up right now says, will the United States still have a central commanding role? And 61% say yes. And so I do think that NATO is going to continue to require U.S. leadership. I think for some of the higher end capabilities, nuclear deterrence, ISR, that the United States is going to continue to need to provide those capabilities. So I think the real shift is on the conventional balance and asking European allies to step up and do more for the conventional defense of Europe. And that process is starting, but it'll take time. And so in a way, this isn't new. It's kind of turning back to during the Cold War, where Germany and other frontline states did have serious military capabilities there alongside the United States. So that's the shift I see. I expect continued U.S. leadership, but with European allies stepping up more on the conventional force posture side.
And how much do you think those shifts will be due to this administration's treatment of the alliance, and how much is it just sort of about the broader trajectory of NATO overall?
I think it's both. I think for good reason. The United States is more worried about a major war with China than a major war with Russia, and so the priority is there. We've seen that in the national security strategy and the national defense strategy. And really, I mean, every administration going back to at least Obama had wanted to do less in the Middle East and Europe to pivot to Asia. So I think there are geopolitical trends going in that direction. I do think this administration has accelerated them, and you don't have to take my word for it. Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, has said that he thinks the two major forces getting Europeans to step up are one, Vladimir Putin and his aggressive foreign policy, but then also President Trump.
And I do want to come back to the war on Ukraine, but next I'm going to go to this slide on strategic autonomy and Europe's ability to take more responsibility for its own security. the survey found that majority of respondents believe that in the next 10 years, Europe will have achieved strategic autonomy. Jorn, I'm wondering if you agree with this. I mean, how challenging is it for Europe to actually do this?
Oh, two big questions. Look, is this likely, and are we on our way? Yes, I think we've seen a fundamental change since certainly February 2022 and Russia's full-scale invasion, but then accelerated, as Matt put it, by the Trump administration's policies and the political approach to push really hard on European allies. I always have a little bit of an issue with the strategic autonomy terminology in this. I know it's a very sort of ill-defined, undefined term, but I think if we're really seeing this level of spending coming online in Europe, this focus on some strategic enablers and some really big gaps and some key capabilities, you will see a Europe that will be able to act very differently in a 5 to 10 year horizon. I don't know, if Germany is spending 160 billion euros on defense in a few years, if we really get there, to your earlier question about NATO, that will change the political dynamics in NATO, not just for Germany, but for European countries, other Europe, and that U.S.-European dynamic. And I think in Europe, we're also very good at underselling ourselves. This idea that all militaries are entirely decrepit and incapable of doing anything. I mean, let's be a little bit more realistic. There's still capabilities. And that goes, by the way, if you take this beyond security to the economy and technology. I'm not negating or minimizing the challenges, but there's still a lot of substance to work with. And if you have this spending come online, I think this is the trajectory, whether it is strategic autonomy that Europe will achieve by any date X. I'm more doubtful, but that we will have a Europe that is much more capable of a conventional deterrent vis-a-vis Russia, that is developing key capabilities or redeveloping them. That is the trajectory, and I think that's a path we will see by 2036 for sure.
Matthew, what do you think? I mean, how difficult is this for Europe to get to this place?
I think it depends on what strategic autonomy means. And so if it means a more capable Europe within a US-led NATO, I think I agree with this. If it means a Europe that's autonomous and independent from the United States, I'm much more skeptical. And I'm reminded of Henry Kissinger's famous quote of, when you want to call Europe, who do you call? Because it's not one coherent political entity. The Spanish and the Lithuanians see the challenges facing the continent and how to deal with them very differently. And so historically, it has required U.S. leadership to bring together these different countries in a common direction. And I think that's exactly what's happening right now. The United States is a major force pushing the Europeans to spend more on defense. And again, as Secretary Rutte said, there's no way European countries would have agreed to the 5% defense spending target if it hadn't been for President Trump. So I guess I see a more capable Europe, but with the United States still playing a leadership role.
That makes a lot of sense. Some of the findings on the Ukraine war obviously stuck out to me as well. Majority saying that they believe the war will end in a frozen conflict. So a declining number seeing it ending on favorable terms to Russia. Jorn, what do you think about when you look at the coming months and years, and obviously the Trump administration is trying to negotiate this deal between Ukraine and Russia? I mean, how likely do you think it is that there won't be a resolution that will be a frozen conflict?
I think it's a significant likelihood. At the same time, we've consistently underestimated Ukraine in Washington and across Europe, really, and what that country, under terrible circumstances, has achieved over the last 4 years, and maybe even going back to 2014, the last 12 years. We shouldn't underestimate Ukraine, and we just as Europe shouldn't talk itself down, I think it's also very dangerous to consistently make Russia 10 feet tall. I mean, half a year ago, we were all talking about how impressive the Russian economy is under the pressures, and that's a very different picture now. So I think, again, predicting that is extremely hard. I do think there's a significant likelihood we will end up with a frozen conflict, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And Melanie, I actually want to go to you for this question, because one thing I've been interested in is, the degree to which the U.S. and other countries are trying to get China involved in brokering an end to the war. I mean, do you think there's any scenario under which China actually could play a meaningful role in trying to bring the conflict to an end?
Look, China could bring the conflict to an end tomorrow if it stopped allowing goods and money to flow through Chinese markets to Russia. It works well for Xi Jinping to have the West tied up in this conflict in Europe. I think China has deeply underestimated how damaging China's support for Russia is to its relationship with Europe. The fact that despite the frictions between the U.S. in the transatlantic relationship, the fact that Beijing hasn't been able to pull Europe closer is largely due to the impact of China's Russia partnership on the hearts and minds within Europe. Given that China is very clearly on Russia's side in the conflict, and there is ample evidence for that. For example, Chinese state media repeats Russian propaganda. You can just trace, word for word. They're doing the same messaging. The Atlantic Council has a terrific Russia-Ukraine team that did an event here with a group that was doing reporting showing that drone companies and other firms within China are supplying both sides of the war effort, the Russians and the Ukrainians. And if they get an order from both, they'll fill the Russian order and not supply the Ukrainians. There is very clear that they're putting a thumb on the scale and that thumb is on the side of Russia. Given that, I don't see necessarily what role they play in a useful peace negotiation. But if the Ukrainians want them at the table, I think it should be up to the Ukrainians.
Mm-hmm.
If I can just add to that, Chinese officials have said, standing next to the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Security Policy, we cannot afford Russia to lose this war, explicitly in front of cameras. That's a pretty clear answer to your question, I think.
Right. And Matthew, I have one more question for you, and then our producers are telling me we have a little bit of time for in-person audience Q&A. We were chatting in the green room earlier, and you were telling me, highlighting the figure, 40% in the survey said that a world war is likely in the next 10 years. How worried are you about that, and what might that look like?
I'm worried, and I think this is one of the most dangerous moments the United States has faced in its history. As we were talking about before, there is the risk that China could attack Taiwan. The United States does have this strategic ambiguity policy, but as Melanie said, and I agree with her, I think the United States would intervene, and so that would be a direct U.S.-China war. Our Indo-Pacific security team here at the Atlantic Council has done some really good work on simultaneous China-North Korea conflict, because if there's a war between the United States and China over Taiwan, it's not going to somehow stay constrained to the Taiwan Strait. It's going to become a region-wide war, likely include North Korea. And then if the United States is in a major war in Asia, what does Putin do? Does he just watch and eat popcorn, or does he say, this is my opportunity to go after Estonia and other vulnerable NATO allies? And so I don't know that I agree that, 40% seems high, but I do think there is a real risk of simultaneous conflict with multiple adversaries across Eurasia.
Mm-hmm. And so we have about 10 minutes left, so if we could get some mics and do some in-person questions. If people have questions, just raise your hands. All right, got one here.
How likely is
Just wait for the, sorry. Thanks.
How likely is the United States to face a possible attack on its infrastructure in the next decade?
We already have, right? With all of the there's very public information that there have been multiple Chinese state-sponsored attacks on U.S. public infrastructure that have been discovered by the U.S. government. The typhoons, Volt Typhoon, for example. So that's already happening. The question to me is, why aren't more people upset about it?
Matthew, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. It's already happening. And then tying it back to the last question, one of the things I worry about is if there is a major conflict, in World War I and World War II, we were kind of lucky that the conflict was over there. If there is a major conflict, I think it will come to the U.S. homeland this time. And building on what Melanie said, public information also about China conducting cyber intrusions and basically laying in wait. And in the event of a conflict, then would be prepared to conduct cyber attacks and other attacks on critical infrastructure around U.S. bases in Texas, California, and Hawaii to try to prevent the United States from flowing forces forward in the event of a conflict. So I think it's something that's happening, and they're planning to do more.
Mm-hmm. Another one over here. Oh, just wait for the mic. There we go.
Excellent panel, and thank you. I wonder, in the context of congressional authorizations of money for conventional warfare, whether there is a similar or growing consideration in terms of, as you say, cyber and related and increasing, it seems, accelerating attacks by China and Russia.
I wonder if Matt and I agree. I'm a bit shocked that Capitol Hill isn't paying more attention to this. There's a lot more that we can be doing for network defense. I don't think we should be sitting idly by knowing that there are intruders in our infrastructure networks. Volt Typhoon suggests that all of our cell conversations have been exposed. I think that this is a big issue. Possibly part of the challenge for the US system is it kind of ties up too with digital privacy. And that's an issue where we also have a lot of challenges, so it's a big sticky wicket to untangle, but I would really like to see this become a much higher priority. These are solvable problems, but it requires saving money, shining more of a light on what's happening, and working collaboratively between the government and private sector to get more public-private partnership working together to defend and respond to these cases.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? One right there.
Thank you. Really enjoyed the panel. Question might be a difficult one, but regarding AGI and potential for a world war, do you regard AGI, artificial general intelligence acquisition, as increasing or lowering the probability of some sort of worldwide conflict? And do you think that potentially could lead to some sort of revolution in the international system? Thank you.
So we do have questions in the survey about AGI, and if I'm remembering correctly, a majority of the experts say that it will be here by 2036, but go to the survey for more details on that. In terms of how it affects conflict, it's a good question. You have many in the West say, well, we should be very careful about automating weapon systems, the movement to ban lethal armed what's the technical term? Anyway, armed drones without a human in the loop. But even if we want to do that in the West, are Xi and Putin and Kim Jong-un going to agree? And in many ways, they might have more of an incentive to move forward with this kind of thing. And then does that leave the West at a disadvantage? The CEO of Palantir has spoken publicly about this, and he says, no, we need to move full steam ahead. We can't let China or others get the advantage. So I think we are moving in this direction, even though some might want to stop it. What is the implication for the risk of war is a good question. I don't have a great answer to that one.
Yeah, I was fascinated by the result that 76 thought that there would be in the next 10 years AI making decisions, military decisions without a human in the loop. That's pretty fascinating. Any other questions here? Got one right here.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to build on one of the points that was mentioned in on the slides about Europe's economy lagging behind, but Europe achieving strategic autonomy. And I just wondered if you could expand a little bit more on that. And especially now with the upcoming EU Industrial Accelerator Act, just talk a little bit more about your point as well about free markets and how Europe is sort of balancing that. Thank you.
Again, disclaimer at the top, I'm not trying to negate or minimize some very real challenges for Europe's economy. And we've known them for a long time. It's sort of, the former president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, said, we all know what we have to do, we just don't know how to get reelected once we do it. And that's sort of been Europe's problem for a long time. We all know about internal markets, challenges, deregulation, need for deregulation, simplification, the addressing the fragmentation of financial, capital, defense, energy markets. So we know the problem, we have the diagnosis. Europe hasn't really been able to move on the treatment, so to speak, as ambitiously and boldly as it needs to. I think the political winds are changing there. We're seeing the summit later this week, very much focused on Europe's competitiveness. And I think we're seeing more leaders stepping up and saying Europe needs to also get a little bit out of its psychological funk in many ways, right? Yes, there are real challenges, but there's also significant strengths, assets, and depth and substance in the European economy. And you can run through that. And, I think Kristalina Georgieva, managing director of the IMF, said it best a few days ago when she pointed out, the Economist rated 7 out of 10 of the best performing economies globally were European Union member states, right? 12 of the top 20. There's still European technology leadership, whether we look at advanced chip manufacturing equipment technology, whether we look at wide-bodied aircraft, chemicals, biotech, ship engines. You go down the list and there's still a lot Europe can work with. A much deeper manufacturing base, and not only that, but a much deeper skilled labor force in Europe. That will be a huge advantage when it comes to the defense ramp up that we were talking about at the beginning. And so there's real strengths. I think there's also real challenges. I think a very clear-eyed, realistic approach of how to leverage the strengths and address some of the challenges. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of that. Competitiveness debate, not as ambitious as all of us would like to see it. Trade diversification, we just saw the EU-Mercosur, EU-India trade deals, and a number of other areas, and the industrial policy initiatives that we're seeing. So I think there's a lot of good that we just need to build on and get faster and bolder on in Europe to achieve results. And I think that's also very much linked up, given the deep integration between the United States and the European Union economy, Europe's economy, that's totally underestimated at all times. Just people so mesmerized by Chinese figures. Let's look at the substance here a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're just about out of time, so I want to thank you all for such a wonderful discussion. It's been really fascinating, and to our audience, too, for some great questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tell me when to go. I can go.
You can walk behind too.
Behind, okay. Yeah.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much, Morgan, Melanie, Matthew, Jorn, our senior directors here at the Council's fascinating discussion on what the future might look like. So every year, our junior staff from around the Council uncover snow leopards. As Peter had mentioned, they're under-the-radar phenomena that appear in specialty communities, but they don't always get that attention in the general public. And most importantly, they have the potential to significantly change the world for better or worse. So I have with me today 3 of my co-authors for the snow leopards of this year's edition. I have Uliana Shurtain of our Global Energy Center in Romania office. I have Dominique Ramsawak of our Digital Forensic Research Lab, and then I have Tatavik Kachathrian from our events team. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining me. I want to dive right in it. So, Uliana, let's start with your snow leopard, because I feel like many here are probably familiar with brain drain. But can you tell us a little bit about brain circulation?
Absolutely, and thank you, Ginger, for stewarding this project and for this opportunity to share today. Many do know about brain drain. It's this loss that takes place when a country loses its talent. It's a loss in productivity. It can be a loss in revenue, taxes. And there's also a concept called brain gain, which highlights the benefits. So the most obvious being remittances sent back home. A less understood one is the motivation for populations to pursue higher education at home, thinking that will help them abroad, but perhaps a lot of them staying at home and really contributing to their economy. So it's a really interesting conversation.
And how did you come across this?
Sorry, just to keep explaining, brain circulation captures this more dynamic pattern of migrants who live elsewhere, and they gain skills and capital and networks there, and then they contribute significantly to their nations and economies back home. So it's this loop of leaving, learning, and then returning, and investing from afar perhaps as well, and really turning that global exposure and experience into opportunities at home, because studies show that returning migrants tend to be more entrepreneurial and more resilient than their peers, and so they are the ones who are more likely to start businesses and to launch startups and invest in new, fresh ecosystems. The way I came across this actually was anecdotally in Moldova, where I'm from and closely connected to still. Many people who have lived abroad have been coming home and really starting fresh, new, interesting, unique businesses and ideas. And working here at the Council on Romania and Central and Eastern Europe, it's very clear that the region is benefiting from brain circulation. One report showed that in 2024, startups in Central Eastern Europe raised 3.7 billion euro, which is a 56% increase year over year. And that half of that was raised by startups whose founders had that global experience. So digging into that, I came across a World Bank report that highlighted this idea. This term was coined by Professor Annalise Aksenian at UC Berkeley, and she had started writing about brain circulation in communities of migrants from China and India in the early 2000s.
Okay, so the trend actually dates back to the 2000s, but what would you say has changed over the last decade or two that has made it reemerge, that it once was a niche phenomenon and now it's becoming a really powerful trend?
I think it's a trend that's really picking up speed, and it's spreading geographically, globally as well, for a couple of different reasons. There are a few developments. The first one is connectivity. So communication today is instant, and travel has become much more affordable, and so the world has grown very small, and it's very easy for us to stay connected and to take those leaps and change our lives. I think a second thing is a mindset shift, and some countries are further ahead of others in this, but it's this idea that returning doesn't mean failure to stay abroad, failure to succeed abroad. Returning can be a strategic move by a lot of members of the diaspora, and then also growing opportunity at home. So there are countries that create a more welcoming environment for migrants to come back and to build something. That can look like institutions that support these efforts, regulatory and legal environments that really are easy to navigate and allow them to succeed and to thrive. In some cases, there are government financing programs. So all of this has really amplified.
So this trend has emerged recently, although it dates back. However, I know, Dominique, that your snow leopard has quite literally emerged just within these last few years because of the development and boom of AI. So can you tell me a little bit about what you uncovered?
Yeah, so I decided to talk about generative AI, which I'm sure many of you in this room are familiar with. But I was really intrigued with the way that the training data from generative AI could potentially pose a risk for erasing, omitting, or just flattening cultures for small islands. So that was at the heart of the issue, basically. I'll keep it short and sweet.
Mm-hmm. And so small islands, that's particularly interesting. How did you find out about this research?
Yeah,
I know that you maybe have a personal story regarding this.
Yeah, it is a little bit niche. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and a big part of our culture is oral traditions. That is how we remember ourselves. That is how we know who we are. And I don't think that's just the Caribbean. I think many people have learned and continue traditions through storytelling. I'm sure your grandparents have done that with you at some point. So this idea of memory going through the generations, especially memory that wouldn't have been captured in history books or in other documented sources, that is very important. And I work with the Digital Forensic Research Lab, so we spend a lot of time thinking about the importance of narratives. We know it is important. And every day that we see the impact of technology on society and on society's memory. So I think spending a lot of time thinking about these things. And honestly, I just kind of hit a point where I got tired of gentle parenting, ChatGPT. You know, I kept trying to get it to understand the Caribbean and the nuances, and it just wasn't able to do that. So I think these things all merged together to be my snow leopard.
Definitely. I mean, now we're living in a world of saturated media, and everyone's going to ChatGPT or other chatbots and asking about the world. And so what happens sometimes if your culture is not in that training data? Representation, I think, is a very important issue that lots of people in the AI world are concerned about. So I have a question. Do you think that this is just a technical gap, or how can we best understand what's really driving the way AI is representing small island cultures?
Yeah, I would actually push back a little bit in saying that it's a technical gap or just a gap in the data, and really more an issue of, how do I capture this? Really more of an issue of how information flows and understanding that, like, the data that we're getting from these cultures isn't necessarily captured by so AI privileges information that is digitized already or that is standardized already. And regions like the Caribbean, for example, and I'm a little bit biased there, but I'm sure this applies to other small islands, that have been impacted by systems of like colonialism or slavery, indentureship. Our oral traditions are closely tied to that. The way that we have consumed information and information has been pushed back out is defined by these systems, but they're not necessarily translatable, or translatable, if that's a word, to these data systems. So thinking about it, I think it's a lot more than a technical gap, ultimately. I think we have to acknowledge that there are systems of power at play as well. You know, it would be great, we need to have the data, but we also need to acknowledge that there is this other that the data is going through, you know? I think that's really important for it.
Tech is complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Tech is complicated, and it's probably one of the most fastest developing phenomena in the world. And so it's no surprise that actually some of our other snow leopards also highlighted tech as well. So I think, Tatovik, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about neurotechnology and how you discovered your research this year.
Thanks, Ginger. So neurotechnology is ultimately the fusion between neurology and technology. And a couple of years ago, some researchers at the University of Austin, Texas, they came up with a device called a semantic decoder that ultimately takes the electromagnetic wavelengths from an fMRI machine and converts it into a continuous stream of text. So say I'm put into this fMRI machine, I have visions in my head of me walking down to school. The translation will ultimately come out. AI will say that she is walking down the street. So it's converting what you're thinking, the images of your thoughts, into words. The AI system is very similar to what we use for ChatGPT, to Google's Bard system, just at a larger scale. And so it's really cool and fascinating what can come in the future from these technologies. Actually, where the research came from was I have a passion for the ethics of emerging technologies. And so when I was doing research on technologies earlier on in the year for this piece, I realized that neurotech is new and it's up and coming and it's being invested in heavily now. And there isn't too much ethical guidelines and parameters derived yet. And so I wrote it about neurotech to give light and shine light to this new technology and development. But then interestingly enough, in November of 2025, the UNESCO actually came out and adopted the first global parameters for neurotech. So I think we're taking steps in the right direction.
Can you tell me a little bit more about neurotechnology's positive developments? And then I would like to talk a little bit about the negative aspects, because I feel like there's always that good and bad about tech developments. So can you tell me a little bit about what neurotechnology is being used for?
Yeah, of course. My favorite part of it is that it's being used in the medical world. So for example, patients that have aphasia, that have PTSD, it can be used in those scenarios to allow people that are either unable to talk about their experiences or are experiencing difficulty talking, and converts what they're actually thinking about their images into a continuous stream of text where a psychiatrist, a therapist, or somebody would be able to, in return, assist them. And so that's where I'd like to see it go, more so in the medical world and those type of developments. However, I do think, going into more of the cons, I think there's other ways that it can be taken. Actually, recently, before going too deep into the negatives, there was this research study that Stanford University did on a gentleman that had paralysis, and using this very similar systems, he was unable to move his fingers, and yet he was able to play a video game and move the helicopter. Just by thinking about the movement of his left finger, the system would generate it, and it would make the helicopter go left. So there's really cool developments that are up and coming, but at the end of it, what's really important is deriving those ethical parameters and giving the foundation to this technology so that people don't fear it also. Because on the other side, it can change warfare. It can change diplomacy, because you can have foreign dignitaries speaking to each other in ways that are uncommon, and then you would have to think about how to break encryptions to be able to figure that out. It can change warfare by how autonomous vehicles are being controlled. And so I think there's like a different world that this can be taken into. And also in the legal field, I think this could be used for, it'll change the law because you can use it as a lie detector in criminal court cases. However, at the end of the day, what's going to give comfort and ease to people is the foundational guidelines that are going to have to exist. So the ethical parameters are going to be necessary to be able to use it properly.
So because it's so new, there's so many uncertainties. So I'm sure that people will probably be hesitant to adopt brain decoding technologies for these reasons. Like, why would you say that they would be hesitant, even if they are proven like safe and beneficial?
Great question. I think with all technology, there comes fear because it's an unknown thing. So in the simplest ways of putting it, let's think about when COVID happened, we all had to automatically go from this in-person nature and culture and utilize Zoom and enter this hybrid system, and you begin having virtual meetings, and it was weird. It was different, especially for older generations, and I think it's going to be a similar shift in like that simplest way, where now we actually don't see a world without a hybrid functionality or a virtual component to it. And so I think it's going to end up being very similar. People can't fight against this neurotechnology because it's up and coming. It's going to happen no matter we like it or not. We just have to work with it rather than fight against it. And I think what will ease a lot of people is having the trust that their privacy will not be breached, because our mind is ultimately the last frontier of privacy. And if that's breached, then there's going to be some issues. So I think it's really important to give that guarantee to people that it won't happen.
There needs to be a little bit more regulation, and people need to just start looking into this a little bit more.
Correct, because with all technology, American scholar Ian Barber said, like, it could be a liberator, a threat, or an instrument of power, and I think neurotech falls into this scope very perfectly. It's how we utilize it, what we do with it, and so I think that would be my end, my saying so.
All three of you highlighted unique elements of your phenomena, and I think provided a pretty solid overview of how they're starting to shape the world today. So being as this is our Global Foresight report, I'd like us to set our minds on the future. So you explained, Juliana, how brain circulation is benefiting populations in certain regions, like Eastern Europe, for example. Thinking in terms of scaling its impact, why does brain circulation matter globally, and how can we best leverage it?
Brain circulation is not just a migration trend. It's a practical strategy for growth and innovation. So we live in a world now where we're facing aging populations and skill shortages and very intense competition for talent. And so I think when some of these countries lose their talent, the instinct is to hold on to that precious resource, to discourage or even prevent emigration. But I believe that countries should recognize this as an opportunity, and that they should design systems and pathways and institutions that actively move and drive people, skills, and capitals in those loops, not in lines. So encouraging talent to gain that global experience and exposure, not just a semester abroad, to really go and understand and absorb. Maintaining very strong bridges with the diaspora community and finding ways to engage them from afar in a very active, practical ways, and then making it very easy and attractive for members of this diaspora to return or to start investing or engaging in very practical ways, to start building at home. I believe that the future belongs to those societies that treat mobility as a renewable resource, because they understand that migration has the capacity to be the backbone of global innovation.
And I want to go back, Tatvik, to your mentions about hesitation earlier with neurotechnology. Thinking of it on a global scale, which consequences could you foresee with the weaponization of the technology? Could it eventually translate into being a threat on a global scale?
Definitely. I think with all technologies that's possible, especially when you're thinking about breaching somebody's privacy in a way that has never happened before. So similar to the consequences of what can happen with this technology, I would bring that to the larger scale, because it can affect warfare, it can affect diplomacy, it can affect a lot of aspects of how we see national security. And so I think that's why it's really important, and I give big kudos to UNESCO for already adopting the guidelines, and I think it's really important that we have institutions and organizations that push forward these policies, just so that we can mitigate the offset of exposure of too much of a blowout.
I'm curious, Dominique, on the global impact of your snow leopard, because AI appears to be embedded in our futures, whether we like it or not. What recommendations would you suggest we focus on to prevent small island cultures from being erased by AI?
Yeah, I think there are 3 avenues that we could probably take, buckets, if you will. I think we need to treat cultural representation in data sets as a governance priority. The same way that privacy or bias in AI systems is important, I think that reality is like that's something that needs to be highlighted. And I think this is with small islands to really leverage their places in governance systems, so like the UN, to highlight that this is an issue, right? First, we need to identify what's going on, and then we can start pushing for more frameworks, more policies to protect it. And I mentioned this a bit earlier, but I think we have to also acknowledge that there are like, the word's not coming out for me, asymmetries at play, where while there is a need for islands to strengthen, their capacity to contribute to the data sets, right? Almost building towards a model of capacity building. I think that is important. I think having agency to the process, while I'm acknowledging it's not an easy thing to do, I think them being able to contribute to it is important. I think the reality of the situation is the power for actual change lies somewhere else. It does not lie within these communities, and this is why it's a snow leopard. This is why it's a problem. And I think ultimately, once we've done the policy, done the advocacy, we need metrics, right? We need metrics that are very interdisciplinary and very specific, so we could actually see if what we're doing is having an impact. And again, this is not something that could just be standardized across the board. And I think ultimately all of these things coming together have importance because we're starting to trust AI, right? Like AI is really, really good at convincing you that it is an expert, a leading expert on XYZ issue. And I think as we continue to trust AI, this then expands away from small islands, developing states, or from like these unique marginalized communities that are not in the data sets. This starts to expand into our day-to-day interactions with AI. I think ultimately this becomes an issue of like how we perceive these islands and these communities, but also how they then start perceiving themselves. But that's enough of my existential dread.
I want you to give one kind of final takeaway that I would like our audiences to think about when it comes to these snow leopards, its impact, or just the things that you're probably going to be tracking now that you've kind of discovered this, that you will be following in the future. What would you say to our audiences about your discoveries? Uliana, let's start with you maybe.
I'm very optimistic about this trend. I think for a really long time, as someone who came from the region, it was something we were really upset and nervous about. How could we continue developing our culture, our economy, our standing kind of on the world if our best talent was leaving, if our best talent was finding opportunity abroad that fit them better at the moment or seemed to. And I think this change is showing that really it is longer term and it can be approached intentionally. So if you let it go, if you treat it as something that can come back, as something that can pay dividends, it really might. But you have to make the effort as a country, as an institution, as a region, you have to make the effort to allow for that growth, for that fusion of different experiences, and then welcome it back home.
Tatvik, what about you? Neurotechnology.
It's coming. We can't hide from it. And so I think it's really, really important that we understand what it is capable of to be able to get in front of it before technology is able to breach our own privacy. Because the way AI works is sometimes we'll end up getting out of our control and the human will be removed. So there's my existential threat. But I do think as long as we are on top of neurotechnology, I think we will be able to kind of make it a smooth and seamless transition. Than
combat threats, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Dominique, what about you?
I feel bad. I'm taking the more negative approach to this, but I do have hope ultimately. Something I think about all the time, I think one of my professors mentioned this, is that AI kind of puts up a mirror at the worst of society. So you could go home and think about that tonight. And I think even before AI, this has been a challenge for regions like the Caribbean, right? Like sources haven't been really good at capturing the nuance of the melting pot that is the Caribbean, and you kind of end up with the Pirates of the Caribbean byproduct, right? Not great. So I do think like these are systemic issues that have continued, but yeah, I think maybe with some good policy and some advocacy and just highlighting at least, and that is a starting point, I think there could be hope.
Well, thank you so much, ladies. This was a fascinating discussion, and it's only half of this year's snow leopards. So I encourage you to go to our Global Foresight landing page. And to read the other snow leopards that we had, Sarah Wallace did a feature on the declining human rights order. Nikita Shah investigated the increasing amount of cyber companies in warfare. And then I wrote a piece on the transformative power of kelp in fighting the climate and biodiversity crises. So please take a look and expand your minds to what is possible that we might not be finding in our everyday news. So thank you. We ended our snow leopards discussion on the perfect note to transition into the final piece of Global Foresight 2036, because as Dominique mentioned, AI is taking the world by storm. So this year we decided to team up with our Atlanta Council Technology Programs experts to do a deep dive into understanding AI, its capabilities to predict the future, and how it may evolve over the coming decades. So I'm pleased to share one of the 3 videos that we created with them. Please go to our website also to watch the other 2. Thank you.
Okay, AI.
Hey there. What's on your mind today?
I like the selection of voice already.
I'm glad that he sounds like a British diplomat.
It's a very soothing way to have this answer delivered to us.
Will there be another world war in the next decade? And if so, where will it start?
A survey by the Atlantic Council found that 40% of global strategic...
It's actually fun. It cites the Atlantic Council.
It sucks. When you ask it to predict the future, you're asking it a big, unbounded question.
It is not a crystal ball. In technical terms, AI is probabilistic. It is not predictive or deterministic. That just means that AI is great at guesswork. I would not trust today's AI systems to reliably forecast global affairs. And I think that comes down to the fact that so often global events don't follow predictable patterns. And in my mind, that's because so much of global geopolitics is driven by human decisions.
When you think really about prediction, a lot of prediction is finding the signal in the noise, or the little thing that stands out. What current AI models are extremely good at doing is pulling information from many different sources, aggregating it, and then providing quick and usually pretty accurate overviews and summaries of that information.
Artificial intelligence, the way we use it now, is not transformational yet, especially if we think about other revolutions that came before it. It cannot experience the real world. Some of us may be familiar with the allegory of the cave by Plato. So AI is kind of like those cave dwellers experiencing the world as shadows and echoes.
In the existing universe of data, what AI can do is identify novel insights, identify trends that may have taken humans a lot of time to manually produce. Its limitation is that it cannot produce new information. It can't expand the universe of knowledge that we're currently training on.
The way that these tools are designed is not optimized for specific applicable problems. So from the model standpoint, it is a generalized, general purpose, general tool trying to make very specific claims or very specific assumptions and judgments about hard problems.
It's predicting it from the perspective of an AI, not from the perspective of a human, and it has a fixed perspective, even as it claims a level of omniscience that it doesn't possess.
One thing about artificial intelligence is that it's extraordinarily good at organizing the existing universe of information or data.
Today's AI systems are well suited for predictive tasks where there are stable patterns and there's a good amount of historical data to train the systems on.
If we have good data that is generally predictive about what will happen in the future, like vast amounts of climate data that we have, then AI is a really, really useful tool for predicting things like droughts or storm seasons or other really important geopolitical things that lead to things like food insecurity.
What is possible is that in the future, we're going to see a larger application of small language models that are built for specific purposes and have that kind of contextual knowledge, so that when you log in, you're logging into geopolitical chatbot or French political chatbot, as opposed to general purpose transformer chatbot. And it's a much higher likelihood that it'll be able to give you good answers.
One of the trends I would look out for in 2026 is countries going all in on sovereign AI. The principle driving this trend towards sovereign AI is quite simple. It's governments saying we need to control AI before it controls us. And we've seen a series of sovereign AI announcements from 2024 and 2025. We can expect that momentum to really pick up in 2026.
We're seeing a lot of attention today on building what are called world models. Instead of predicting the next word, these models are predicting the next action in the world. So they're trained to start to be able to model the way things in the world interact, fall, fail, and the like.
When ChatGPT launched, the context window was about 4,000 characters, not very much. A year later, it was 100,000. Today, in 2025, some of the most popular consumer-grade models have a context window of up to 2 million. If current trends do continue, you could imagine in 10 years an absolutely fantastical, extremely powerful tool that is assisting you in every aspect of daily life and essentially knows what you want at all times. But my greater concern is then who will have access to this tool. Because for AIs to be this capable, they will be immensely energy intensive. They will be extremely expensive.
Humans can think. Generative artificial intelligence models can't think. That's a really, really crucial distinction. It's easy to anthropomorphize something that'll chat with you.
Something that all humans have, which is really quite a miracle when you think about it, is higher order thought. No matter how omniscient these tools seem to be, they themselves are creations from limited human-created data sets and human processes designed in a particular moment in time.
Human beings are still better than AI in certain areas, especially when it comes to areas that require expertise, like high-level expertise, and also better than AI in areas that require that human-to-human connection, especially, say, in service sectors.
One of the most influential researchers in generative artificial intelligence is a gentleman named Jan LeCun. And his point is that we've become over-indexed on this current generation of technology, believing that this is the only one true technical path to a level of computing capability or pattern recognition that will look like something that sounds or feels like general human intelligence. He doesn't think we're close, and I'm pretty convinced by his arguments. I certainly hope there's always going to be a need for human intelligence, and if not, at least for human creativity and for empathy. I don't think we're in a situation where we've invented a technology that's going to replace us.
All right, so I mentioned that at the outset that I would be the last speaker. Thank you all for coming again today. Before I do my close, I would like to highlight the survey that we asked all of you to take. Hopefully many of you did. So let's go into some of the results. We asked you 3 questions. One of them was a multi-part question. By 2036, will there be or have been another world war involving a multi-front conflict among great powers? 57% of you said no, 43% said yes. That's roughly in line with the findings from the survey that we had in the fall, which was 63-37, so consistent. To the question, military, in terms of which countries are going to have power and which ones are not going to have power. On the military question, which country will be the leading power by 2036, again, consistent with our survey findings, 68% of you said the US, 18% said China. In our survey, those numbers were 73-24. Interestingly, 7% said the EU in the military domain. it was 0% in the survey findings in the fall. So take that for what you will. Diplomatic influence, again, roughly in line with our findings, 33% saying the US will be the leading diplomatic power in 2036, 35% for China. Interestingly, 26% for the EU, again, high marks for the EU, higher than in the fall survey, which was 17% for the European Union. Economic power, China, again, perceived by all of you as being the #1 in the world by the year 2036 to a tune of 55, 29, and 7% for the EU. Those numbers are very, very consistent with our survey findings. In terms of cultural or soft power, which country or bloc do you expect to be the world's leading power by the year 2036? Again, the US about in line with where we were in the fall at 38%. Our survey said 35%. What is the big contrast here is China versus the European Union. China was roughly in line with the findings, 15% today versus 17% in the fall, and the European Union competing with the United States in terms of its soft power, 35%, and the fall said 30%. And then technological innovation, high marks for China, 63 to 25 in its favor over the United States, with interestingly 5% for India, 3% for the EU. Our numbers were roughly even for the US and China, 47 to 44. Okay, so that is the end of that piece of the presentation. And if we can pull up the last slide, please. There we go. This is the end. All of the people who are on this screen contributed in one way or another in terms of substance, planning, the assistance with this entire effort from soup to nuts. And this is the thing that I'm proudest of over a 5-year period, is this screen. That these 36 or 38 people, and if, by the way, you're not on this screen and you should be on this screen, I apologize, it's my fault. But these 36 or 38 or 40 people who are on this slide represent really much of the Atlantic Council, our staff and affiliated fellows. And I'm most proud of this because, as I said at the outset, the point of Global Foresight, or one of the points of Global Foresight, was to highlight and surface the incredibly rich, diverse, and truly deep thinking that occurs at this organization. And so for me, the most satisfying piece of doing this over the last 5 years has been to achieve this. And so I thank all of the people who helped us produce this document. And I thank, of course, all of you, as well as all of those people online for paying attention to the work that we're doing. I hope, again, that all of you engage with this document. It is really, really substantive, and you're going to find something that interests you, I guarantee you. Thank you all very much, and until next time.